True podcast. We are happy to be with Susie Smidt today from our staff at Faithful and True. And of course, as always, Dr. Greg Miller, our host. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing
Good,
well.
thank you.
Good. Well, we're excited to conclude a series that we started with Susie and Debbie Laser a short while ago about the stages of recovery, stage number 2. And today we're going to bring to you the second half of that presentation.
Yeah, and just to begin with, this second stage we refer to as a time to build. And so kind of the way that it's understood is the initial crisis of the coupleship is over. There's been some work that has been done. There's a little bit of stability. And so at this point, the couple can begin to build into their relationship. And even as we think about this in terms of a healing journey, it's kind of like the early triage has been done. Maybe there's been some initial surgery, and now there's an opportunity for the couple to begin to experience healing. Mm-hmm. Are there any words that you would use to describe it when you're working with the couple that you can begin to know that maybe they're ready or they're in stage 2?
Well, I think they're in that place of working on further trust and also maybe skill building.
Okay. I'd also say there's something that shifts where there's a little bit more stability.
Sure.
You know, in the early days, years, there can be a lot of chaos and things can feel unsettled. But when a couple begins to move into this stage, the stage of building, there's a sense of stability and they have something that they can build upon.
And hope.
Right. Yeah. At the end of stage 1, I think what happens is couples begin to experience hope, which then allows them to want to invest. You know, I use the image of remodeling a lot in talking about couples and recovery. And this is the place where there's a commitment to remodel the house. They're starting to discover that there were some challenges that, you know, the contractor found, and they're ready to go after and figure out what they need to do to take care.
That's a good picture.
They've discovered the asbestos in the walls and the bad wiring, but they're still committed to remodeling and rebuilding the house.
You've been watching a lot of Hometown.
I have. That's been my pandemic experience.
Ben and Aaron are finding asbestos.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually true because that early stage seems like a lot of tearing down. Mm-hmm. So it is a good analogy.
Well, and what happens for a lot of, I do like this analogy. What happens is, so many times you pull off some drywall and you find asbestos, you find maybe some rotted wood, you find some bad wiring, and there can be a temptation to just put the sheetrock back up and pretend that it's not there. And cosmetically, it could look great. Mm-hmm. But for those couples that are really going to invest in the building, they do the hard work of removing the asbestos and getting the new wiring so that when the sheetrock goes back up, they can be confident in the build.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of couples who are in this building stage get very specific and intentional to distinguish between perceptions and truths. And we really do encourage couples to use the language that owns their perceptions. Mm-hmm. And Beth and I would often joke around this idea of sometimes we say something and we say it as if it's the God Almighty truth. And the reality is, it is our perception. Mm-hmm. And for you, Susie, as you work with couples, what begins to shift when couples become more intentional in their language and begin to own perceptions as perceptions?
I think they're shocked at the number of perceptions that are untrue. Mm-hmm. Shocked that, because all of my perceptions feel true to me.
Right.
Russ has felt true to him. And, John Gottman, he'd say that almost 60% of those are untrue.
Right.
And so I think there needs to be a lot of humility, humbleness in accepting the fact that all my perceptions aren't necessarily true.
Right. And I even, think that this idea of owning it as a perception, mm-hmm. and to be able to say, here's my perception, it may be right, it may be wrong,
right,
but it's my perception. And what's also true in coupleship is if we're declaring things as the God Almighty truth, then we begin to argue about that. We begin to case build and we begin to kind of go for evidence. But nobody can argue with the fact that it's my perception if I'm willing to own it as my perception.
Right.
And what's true is our perceptions are shaped and formed by our experiences. When we work with couples and couples come to the couples workshop, we're going to want them to really explore their own story in such a way to own, my perceptions about life, about me, about men, about women, about sex, about relationships come somewhere from my own story. That's why my perceptions may be different from somebody else's.
Right. The filter through which I look at life is mine, only mine. And we're checking out the accuracy, really, of that.
And one of the things that informs our perceptions, I think, are our core beliefs. And when men and women come to the individual workshop, I know at the men's workshop, we spend a lot of time talking about core beliefs and helping men to identify them. Because if I have some core beliefs about, again, men, relationships, women, then that's going to influence my perceptions and how I see things. And so part of what we're wanting to do is help a couple distinguish between a perception and a truth. And one of the best ways to do that is to say, hey, I want to check something out with you. My perception is this. An example that I use a lot from my own relationship with Beth is I have a lot of anxiety when somebody is distant from me. If I perceive that they're being quiet or removed, and my immediate assumption is I've done something wrong and somebody is angry. And that comes from my own story. So one of the things I had to learn to do is if Beth was quiet or she seemed distant, that was my perception, I would need to check in and say, hey, my perception is that you're mad at me. Is that correct? And sometimes she was, and she could say, yeah, that's correct. Other times she'd say, no, I'm just tired, or I've been thinking about this, or I'm concerned about this. But my filter was to always interpret that it was about me. And so we want to encourage couples to even get better at that language of checking that out.
It was refreshing for me, and Russ started doing it with great regularity. Can I check out my perception? And you guys are alike in that. Often somebody's mad at me. I've done something to make somebody angry. And, we could have good discussion about what was actually true.
Right.
Maybe I was quiet because I was busy, or the kids were, being kids, or I had a headache, or whatever it was. Right. And we were able to actually arrive at truth instead of head off on our dance of him making assumptions that he's in trouble, I'm angry. And I think of the word discovery in this stage. There's a lot of discovery about things that we have assumed to be true based on our perceptions, our whole marriage really, that get us going off into our dance and eventually stuck, that doesn't have to be the case.
Right. And you mentioned, Russ and I do identify a lot with each other. And that idea of being in trouble. One of the perceptions I would have is I'm in trouble. And I remember Beth and I having a conversation one time where she was able to say, Greg, I'm not your mom.
Yes.
I'm not a parent. You can't be in trouble with me. I might be angry. I might be hurt. I might be sad. But even for me, when I became aware of that internal language of I'm in trouble, that was one of the indicators that I wasn't in my wise adult place. I was more in this younger little boy place, and I was bringing that into the relationship. So it was helpful for me to even name my perception as I'm in trouble, because that gave me insight into where I was and how I was moving towards Beth and what part of me was involved in that. And so that I love that idea of this is about discovery. And in order for there to be discovery, there must be vulnerability.
Right.
There's enough safety in this stage, this time of rebuilding, that there's enough safety now that we can begin to be vulnerable with each other. And then we can begin to experience some of the transitions that we've been looking for in our relationship. And then ultimately, we're going to talk about later, stage 3, the thriving, we're able to move into that.
Well, and at this stage, self-awareness is developing too, where earlier, perhaps an awareness myself of that I'm even having a perception doesn't exist.
Right.
But I've gone through stage 1, I've been working on this, and so more and more and more, the vulnerability can happen because the self-awareness is there.
Right. So the idea is, we're going to own our perceptions, and we're going to move from perceptions to truth. And the way that we talk about it is this idea of in that moment of chaos or trigger or conflict, we get grounded in the truth. And it's this idea of what is true about me, what is true about the situation, and what is true about God. And what we know is when a couple can get into that place of truth, it recalibrates the entire engagement and relationship. And in fact, in the iceberg model that we use, at the bottom that Virginia Satir identified was the truth.
Right.
And, I often early in recovery would be so triggered that the language I would use is, I can't find the truth in me. And that's where my community was so helpful, because I could reach out to them. I could text them or call them and just say, hey, I'm so triggered. Can you remind me of what is true? And a lot of times, if it was me reaching out because of chaos in my relationship with Beth, they were able to remind me of the truth. The truth is you are a good man. The truth is you are working recovery. The truth is Beth is for you. The truth is Beth is angry, So all of that truth, though, made it possible for me to get grounded in that. And that place of grounding then gives the stability for couples to move forward.
So really checking out our perceptions is a big part of how we begin to rewire the lies we're believing.
Absolutely.
I mean, that'd be another way to say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And part of it is the truth of God, and this idea that I need to be reminded that God is big enough and God is loving enough to be with me. That, often in my prayers, I say that because of God's grace and love, there is hope. And those are the kind of foundational principles that when we can get grounded in those, the chaos, the storm doesn't necessarily go away, but we're able to weather it. I like images and metaphors, and so I often talk about hurricanes. And, one of the things that has happened over the last several years is we've identified these ways to build a home that can withstand the hurricane. So, let's say that a Category 3 hurricane is coming on shore, but your house can only withstand a Category 2, you're not going to make it. But as couples work on their relationship, they're strengthening that relationship so that now they can withstand a Category 2 or a Category 3 or even that Category 5 hurricane. And what is part of that is being grounded in the truth. So when the storm comes, they're able to weather it and not be defined by it. Because storms will come.
And you better get the termites and the asbestos out of that drywall.
We're back to that housing. Yes.
Well, your analogy is,
anything that weakens the structure needs to be removed.
There you go.
In order for it to survive.
Which is probably a little off topic here, but couples that come through recovery then and experience other hard things in their lives.
Absolutely.
That truth, that foundation, that strength is beneficial and surprisingly helpful for other things.
Absolutely.
Too.
Well, when we are able to navigate the pain and the chaos of betrayal in our relationship, then when other painful, difficult things come along,
and they will.
Yeah. People will die. People will disappoint us. Children won't always make good choices.
Right.
All of those things, we now have the capacity as a couple to move through this. And one of the ways that we can know a couple is thriving is how they navigate pain that comes after the betrayal.
Right.
And many times, I often heard Mark say that when there is some sort of difficulty, the death of a parent or tragically the death of a child, when those things happen, it's those recovery strategies that we're going to need in order to navigate that well.
Yeah.
The next thing that we see in this stage of building is really understanding the desires of the heart. And so we just want to say that Mark and Deb wrote a book, The 7 Desires. It's specifically a principle that says that God has given each of us these 7 desires. It's not a male thing or a female thing. We all have these desires. And it is in the context of our relationship that we are able to meet those desires. And we're going to talk about this in a later podcast, but we're not going to meet them perfectly. Our spouse cannot meet them perfectly. But when we begin to use the language of the desires, it gives us a way to talk to our spouse about those deeper issues.
And I like the way that book is written by Mark and Debbie, where it's unifying. It's not like I have this desire, you have that desire, but it's we all have all 7, and we can find unity.
Yeah.
unity in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of things that are written for couples really emphasize how different we are.
Right.
Which I think in
Right.
the long term is actually not helpful.
Right.
And so this begins with something that is foundationally true for all of us, which, like you said, brings us together. It gives us a common language. And yes, we know that there are differences between men and women, but if we start in the differences, that has a tendency to pull us away versus bringing us closer together. And so if I can understand these desires in my own life, then I have the capacity to understand them in my spouse's life. And so we don't have the time to really dig into all of them, but just for the purpose of identifying them, so we have the desire to be heard and understood. I often heard Mark and Deb talk about this as the desire to be known. And language that I use is intimacy is when I am known, I'm safe, and I'm connected. And we desire that and we fear that because we're afraid that if I'm known, I won't be safe, and in fact, I'll be rejected. So healthy intimacy is when I let myself be known, and part of that is I'm being heard and understood.
Yeah. The next two are affirmation and blessing. And I like talking about those together.
Absolutely.
Because affirmation is praise for something we did well. Blessing, on the other hand, is praise for who we are, separate from anything we've done. And I think that it's easier as a parent, I can say it's much easier to give affirmation. It takes more intentionality to communicate blessing.
Yes. And I think this idea of blessing, I often heard Mark and Deb talk about it as unconditional love. It's the no matter what.
Right.
And
right.
there are ways that we are able to communicate that. I once heard someone say, though, we can never know that we are fully loved and blessed until we fail significantly. You know, and for many of us who were image managers and performers, and we really worked hard to hide the chaos, we created this image that we had it all together and things were going well. We actually were limiting the ability to receive the blessing. And so it's only when we are seen and fully known that we can experience the blessing of unconditional love and acceptance. And I do think as parents, you know, the gift that we can give our kids is knowing that our love for them is in no way attached to their choices or their behaviors.
Right.
The other thing I would say about blessing is the good news is for those of us that weren't fully blessed as children, that doesn't mean that we can't experience it. That through our community and even through our healing on this journey, we can receive blessing, because if we haven't received it, we're going to struggle giving it. And so one of the things I can do as a parent is let others bless me so that I can bless my sons.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that all of us have work to do, and we haven't received these perfectly.
Right.
Maybe we've come from great families and we've gotten most of it, or maybe we haven't gotten much at all. But that can be a really big piece of our recovery, is healing some of these wounded places of what we didn't get.
Right. Another one of the desires is safety. And I heard Mark define safety as the absence of anxiety and fear. And so when we're experiencing anxiety and fear, it's kind of like a warning light on the dashboard telling us that there's something going on where we don't perceive that we are safe. And so part of this safety piece is knowing that ultimately I can navigate through whatever is coming my way. It's almost a confidence, a strength, and the strength doesn't come from me. It comes from who God is. In fact, the way that we create safety is by getting back into our truth. Truth creates safety. And we could and probably will in the future do an entire podcast on this safety issue. But one of the mistakes that we make is believing that someone else through their choices can create safety for me. And it's about me creating safety for myself based upon the choices that I'm making.
One of the things that creates a lot of hope, I think, and progress for the women I work with is the concept that while their husband is working on sobriety and his plan and getting that firmly established, they can create safety for themselves in so many ways that they didn't ever know or realize, or maybe hadn't really thought about. And, you know, as we talk about that wise man, wise woman chair, you know, what are the ways, what are the truths, what are the concepts that each wife can work on to create safety in the meantime.
And what's also interesting is the men in the coupleship also need to work on this safety piece, because what is true is they have been exposed to experiences when they were young where they weren't safe. And then also, ironically, the choosing of the addiction was creating a lack of safety too. So part of what they're working on is, as a wise adult man, making choices where they're creating safety for themselves and they're becoming a safe person for others. Another one of the desires is the desire to be touched. And this is about that non-sexual touch that we all need, that based upon who God created us to be, we need that healthy, safe touch.
And I guess I'm talking a lot about the wives, but that's a lot of what I do. This desire in their heart, I believe they need to come to believe that they can trust touch. That touch doesn't have to mean something sexual. That touch can just be non-sexual. And maybe that's true for the men too, as much as the women, really.
Yeah. Well, and what's true is, for men, this idea of healthy non-sexual touch has been distorted, and for a variety of different reasons. And again, it has everything to do with how we experience touch in childhood. Either the absence of touch, or touch associated with violence, or touch that early became overly sexual. All of those distort our understanding of touch. And part of God's creation is simply that we can be touched and we can be safe. I think what causes touch to be unsafe is when our intuition is telling us there's an agenda behind it and we don't know what that agenda is. So if it is sexual touch in a coupleship, that we're clear that that's part of what is going on. But it's that undefined touch with an agenda that creates chaos, because we don't know what is expected from us. So even getting clear in what the touch is about can be very helpful.
Yeah, when we're working with couples, it seems kind of elementary, but we're encouraging them to say what their touch, as they're initiating touch, what they intend by it. You know, I'd like to hold your hand while we're out walking, and that doesn't mean that I want anything else.
Right.
Or maybe it does mean, but to actually put words to it, to define it.
Well, and I would hear Mark, use the phrase, I want to hold your hand, and that doesn't mean I want to be sexual now or be sexual later.
Okay.
That clear language of where is sexuality in this? Or if what's true is I'd like to hold your hand, and if possible, I would like for us to be sexual later.
Right.
Even in that, then I get the option of choosing how I want to receive that touch. What are the other desires?
The last two desires, chosen and included.
Okay.
And I think chosen in a marriage is all these are foundational, I guess.
All pretty important.
But chosen is that it's just you and me kind of a concept of, there are things in our relationship that we don't share with anyone besides each other. And that one gets really damaged with our population, and can be rebuilt, can be recreated. But initially, it's that tearing down, right? That one gets blown out of the water often.
And what's also true is the idea and the desire to be chosen transcends our marriage and our coupleship, because we do want to be chosen by our community, by our friends, even in the context of our family, to know that we are choosable. And one of the core beliefs that a lot of people have is, I'm not choosable. And so I work with men specifically on this idea of, you are choosable even if nobody is choosing you, because God created you to be choosable. Now, the included is more about choosing is I see you and I choose you. To me, includable is this idea there's a table and there's a chair for you at the table. There's a space for you. I've created a space, and that can be in a a one-on-one relationship, but there's a space at the table for you, or that can be in a group in a community, but there's a space for you. We've saved this space, and you are included. And I've heard Mark and Deb talk about this inclusion piece is important because we want to be included by our spouse in their lives. And that's where the sharing, the talking, the checking in is so important, because I can go through my day and I can even experience my day, but if I'm not sharing it with Beth or with others, I'm not including them in my day. Mm-hmm. And so that inclusion piece is an important part of the coupleship.
Yeah, we find that it's often not that. It's an area maybe to be worked on for couples as they're in this stage of including each other in what they do.
Right.
I ask women, do you know what your husband's day looks like when he leaves the house, or when you both leave the house, or whatever? And I think that can be one of the rewarding parts of this stage, where they're more in touch with each other throughout their day.
Absolutely. Well, this is just some of the indicators of the couples that are building in this stage. And again, we could continue talking about this, but the idea is that in this development, we go to this place where we are able to build, and we're building upon a foundation of truth. And part of that is also safety.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Susie. It's been great to have you back on the Faithful and True podcast. You're always so full of wonderful guidance and wisdom and experience. It's just a pleasure to have you with us. Greg, as always, wonderful words of wisdom. Wonderful.
Right.
And again, we'd like to thank Aaron Wellman. Aaron is our director of social media. He's also the producer and cameraman and light technician and everything else you can dream of for this podcast. Thank you, Aaron. And we hope that today's show for you, as you've been watching the video version, if so, we'd like to invite you to subscribe to our Faithful and True YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you like the video, like the podcast. We also feature this same podcast as an audio podcast on faithfulandtrue.com and on iHeartRadio and iTunes. So we're easy to find, and we hope that you find us often. We're quite encouraged by the numbers that we see as we're able to track how many plays we've had. And over the past couple of short years, we have already surpassed 675,000 plays. So we're pretty excited about those kind of numbers, and we hope that the new video format will bring similar success. So as we leave you today, we'd like to invite you, if you're a man out there that's struggling with sexual purity issues, visit faithfulandtrue.com and click on the workshops. Take a look at the Men of Valor workshop that we host every month. You can register right online. You can call us if you have any questions. There are videos by Greg and Chris Hardesty that answer the most frequently asked questions that men often have. So until we meet with you again, we'd like to thank you. We hope that this coming week for you is going to be a week filled with many blessings and great fishing.